Welcome to Alpine Daily for Tuesday, and I shared with you last week that I've been reading through the book of Galatians, and so I want to share with you each week a few of my thoughts. Today we're in chapter 2. We're looking at a new way of living. In chapter 1, Paul said that the gospel, the basic message of salvation, was so important that to tamper with it or to teach something else would draw down essentially a curse from God. And what he was responding to was the teaching going out that in order to be a good Christian, you had to also keep the Old Testament law, the Jewish law. Christianity sprung out of the soil of Judaism, and so there were people who wanted to retain that Jewish system. And here's how Paul responded to them in chapter 2, verses 20 and following, as he played out this whole new idea of what it means to be saved. He says, "I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I now live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. I do not set aside the grace of God, for if righteousness could be gained through the law, Christ died for nothing." See, that's the old way of living. If righteousness could be gained through the law, that was what Paul's opponents were saying, that the law somehow, fulfilling the law of Moses, was the way to be right with God, and it was also the way to govern your Christian life. But Paul says that if that's the case, then the death of Christ doesn't mean anything. He said there's a new way instead, and he outlines that new way here. He says, first of all, three things about himself. He says, "I have been crucified with Christ." That means the old life has in some way died, the old self, the old me. But here he is, he's alive, and even though he says, "I no longer live," yet here he is writing this book. And so in some sense he died, in the sense that he died to his old life, to the old way of approaching God, to this legalistic dependence on the law. It no longer works, it no longer counts anymore. The second thing he says is that Christ lives in me. So instead of the power of the law being what drives us to do what's right, now instead there's a supernatural power within that drives us to do what's right, and we're dependent on the life and the power of Christ himself within us to live the Christian life. Something that the law could never do was to give us intrinsic power from within to fulfill it, to obey it. And so he says the third thing, "I live by faith." The life I live in the body, and this is my physical life, my everyday life. He says, "I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me." And so, you look in the mirror, you don't see Jesus alive in you. It doesn't look like Jesus is there. And so it's a life really of faith, coming to grips with the reality that the supernatural life of the risen Lord Jesus Christ is resident in us as his followers. And so we live on the basis of that within us, walking day by day, step by step with him, drawing on his strength and his power, rather than just simply trying to fulfill a bunch of rules, regulations, and laws. So I want to encourage you a couple things you could be praying about today, to give thanks for Jesus and what he's done for you, and to pray for his life to be made known through your life today. So pause the video now and spend some time talking to God about those things. Have a wonderful day as you let Christ live through you.